Welcome back, coin collectors. What if a Washington quarter sitting forgotten in a coin jar, a desk drawer, or passed through your hands as everyday change is worth $35,000 or more right now? In today's video, we are going to examine 5 specific Washington quarters, the exact dates, the exact mint marks, the exact errors and varieties that serious collectors and major auction houses have chased for decades, and that most people spend without ever looking twice. Let's get started. Number 1. The 1932D Washington Quarter. In 1932, the United States was not looking for reasons to celebrate. The country was in the grip of the Great Depression, the worst economic catastrophe in its modern history, with unemployment touching 25% of the working population and banks across the country failing at a rate that made ordinary Americans quietly terrified of tomorrow. Into this atmosphere, the United States Mint introduced something that would become one of the most studied and most sought-after coin series in American numismatic history, the Washington Quarter. The coin was not created as a permanent series. Congress had authorized it initially as a commemorative piece to mark the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth, and the original plan called for a single-year issue. But the design. John Flanagan's left-facing portrait of Washington, rendered with genuine sculptural gravity, the noble sweep of his colonial-era wig, the firm set of his jaw, was so well received that the Mint transitioned it into regular circulation coinage, a decision that would shape American pocket change for the next century and beyond. The Denver Mint, which carried the small capital D on the obverse of its coins positioned just beneath the date, produced its first Washington quarters in 1932 under conditions that no Mint official could have anticipated when the year began. The facility was operating under the particular constraints of Depression-era production, a moment when the demand for coinage in everyday commerce had paradoxically collapsed as people hoarded what little currency they possessed and withdrew from the kind of ordinary spending that drove coin circulation in ordinary times. The result was a production run that stands as one of the most consequential in the series' entire history. Denver struck only 436,800 Washington quarters in 1932. To put that number in proper context, a single modern production year at Denver routinely yields hundreds of millions of coins. The 1932D was made in fewer numbers than many collector special editions, and it was made for general circulation, which means that the coins that exist today have survived not through careful preservation, but through the kind of improbable luck that attaches itself to small populations over long decades. What the production numbers alone do not tell you is the condition story that defines this coin's value in the collector market. Of those 436,800 quarters, the vast majority entered circulation immediately and spent the following years passing through Depression-era commerce, through cash registers and change cups, and the pockets of people who had no reason to treat a 25-cent piece as anything other than spending money. The high-relief areas of Flanagan's portrait, the cheekbone of Washington's profile, the top of the lettering, the highest points of the obverse design, absorbed the accumulated friction of that use in ways that are immediately readable to a trained collector examining the coin today. Most surviving examples show the evidence of that circulation in grades that numismatists describe with terms ranging from fine through extremely fine and about uncirculated, grades where the coin remains beautiful and historically significant, but where the market value, while substantial, sits well below what pristine examples command. But the story does not end with circulated coins, because the small production volume of the 1932D, combined with the historical importance of the coin as the key date of the entire Washington Quarter series, has driven collector interest to a level that makes even circulated examples genuinely valuable, and makes the exceptional uncirculated survivors extraordinary artifacts of American monetary history. The coin that emerges from a well-preserved bankroll or a carefully maintained collection in true mint state condition, showing the original cartwheel luster that rolls across the surface of an undisturbed coin as you tilt it under a focused light source, represents something the market responds to with serious attention. There are documented double-die obverse varieties from the 1932D production as well, Coins where the hubbing process that transferred the design from the master hub to the working dies left measurable secondary impressions on specific design elements. Collectors who examine 1932D quarters with appropriate magnification and a working knowledge of what genuine mechanical doubling looks like rather than the more common and less significant machine doubling that is sometimes mistaken for it, have encountered these varieties in old accumulations and estate collections and in the kinds of bank-wrapped rolls that occasionally surface from the savings of people who understood, even in 1932, that these coins were something worth setting aside. Examining a 1932D Washington quarter with the care the coin deserves begins with the most fundamental physical check available to any observer outside a professional grading environment. The weight of a standard 1932 Washington quarter should measure 6.25 grams on a digital scale accurate to 1/10 of a gram, reflecting the 90% silver composition that defined American coinage before the clad transition of 1965. This weight specification is fixed and reliable, and any coin claiming to be a 1932D that deviates significantly from this figure deserves immediate scrutiny. The edge of a genuine 1932D should show the reeded parallel grooves that run consistently around the entire circumference of the coin, with no copper stripe of the kind that identifies the post-1965 clad composition, because this coin carries no copper core and no clad layers. The entire disc is silver through and through, and the edge reflects that with a uniform metallic appearance from rim to rim. Begin your examination in good lighting by evaluating the overall surface impression. On an uncirculated example, the luster should be present and unbroken, that distinctive directional shine that develops when metal flows under striking pressure and creates a microscopically textured surface that catches and redirects light in the characteristic cartwheel pattern. Even a single episode of cleaning or wiping can destroy this surface quality in ways that experienced graders identify immediately, and that result in a details grade from professional services rather than the clean numerical grade that unlocks the coin's full market potential. Then examine the high points of the portrait: the cheekbone, the hair above the ear, the highest part of the eagle's breast on the reverse. These are the first surfaces to show wear, and their condition tells the story of everything the coin has lived through. The collector market for the 1932D Washington quarter operates across a value range that reflects both the coin's absolute scarcity and the extraordinary depth of collector demand for the key date of an enduringly popular series. Honest circulated examples in grades from fine through very fine have appeared in dealer inventories and auction platforms at prices ranging from $200 to $600 or more depending on specific grade and eye appeal, though these figures represent observations from completed transactions rather than guarantees applicable to any specific coin today, because market conditions in this area shift with overall collector interest cycles and the availability of competing examples. Uncirculated examples begin to attract serious attention from institutions and advanced individual collectors alike. Certified mint state examples graded by professional services such as PCGS or NGC at the MS63 level have appeared in documented auction results at figures ranging from $2,000 to $5,000, while exceptional gem quality specimens certified at MS65 have commanded prices reaching $15,000, $20,000, and in the finest documented examples, $35,000 or more at major auction events. These outcomes represent the apex of what the market has demonstrated for the finest known examples, and should be understood as the exceptional rather than the typical, with every specific value contingent on professional authentication, current market appetite, and the presence of motivated buyers at the moment of sale. What the 1932D Washington quarter ultimately asks of anyone who holds one and examines it carefully is an honest confrontation with the difference between what is common and what is rare. Most Washington quarters produced in the nearly century-long history of the series are genuinely common coins, available in abundance and carrying little or no premium above face value. The 1932D is not one of those coins. It is the coin that began the series, produced in one of the smallest mintages in the design's history, during one of the most difficult years in the nation's economic memory, and its survival in meaningful numbers at meaningful grades is one of the quieter miracles of American numismatic history. The collector who encounters one in an old collection, in an inherited box of coins, in a roll purchased from an estate sale, is holding something that deserves every moment of careful attention they can give it. Because what comes next in this series carries its own remarkable story. A coin struck simultaneously with the 1932D at a facility on the opposite coast, under the same Depression-era constraints, and with a production figure even smaller than the one we have just examined, that has driven decades of debate among specialists about which of the two truly deserves the title of the harder coin to find, in exceptional condition. Number 2, the 1932's Washington Quarter. In the same year that the Denver Mint was producing its 436,800 Washington Quarters under the economic pressure of the Great Depression, the San Francisco Mint was undertaking its own first run of the new series with a production figure that remains, to this day, one of the defining facts of Washington Quarter collecting. San Francisco struck 408,000 Washington Quarters in 1932, fewer coins than Denver. A production run so small that numismatic historians have spent decades examining the circumstances that produced it, the equipment limitations, the demand forecasts, the institutional decisions that resulted in a mintage that would eventually make this date one of the most sought-after coins in the entire American series. The San Francisco Mint had been one of the most storied facilities in American coinage history, established in the wake of the California gold rush of 1849 to process the extraordinary wealth of precious metal flowing from the Sierra Nevada and to convert it into the coins that a rapidly expanding Western economy needed. By 1932, the facility had been striking coins for more than 80 years, through booms and busts and monetary reforms and 2 world wars, and it carried in its institutional memory the accumulated expertise of generations of mint workers who understood the craft of coinage at a level that most observers never thought about when they handled the coins that emerged from those presses. The small S mint mark on the 1932S, positioned on the obverse below the date in the location that San Francisco coins of this era carried it, is more than a letter. It is the signature of that facility on a coin that the facility produced in quantities so modest that even its own contemporary workers could not have fully appreciated the scarcity value they were creating. Because in 1932, there was no reason to think of these coins as anything other than what they were: 25-cent pieces made to move through commerce, to pass from hand to hand through the Depression-era transactions that sustained what remained of ordinary American economic life. The production reality of the 1932S, like the 1932D, meant that the coins entered circulation almost immediately and spent the following years doing exactly what circulating coins do. They were spent in stores and dropped into change cups and tucked into pockets alongside other coins and subjected to the continuous low-grade friction that reads as wear to a numismatist examining them decades later. The population of truly uncirculated 1932S quarters that survived those years without entering commerce is small, genuinely and meaningfully small, in ways that the total production figure of 408,000 understates, because not all of that production was preserved from circulation, and even of the coins that were preserved, not all were kept in conditions that maintained the mint state surface quality that professional grading services require for their top numerical assignments. But the story does not end with the common reality of circulated survival, because the 1932S in exceptional condition is one of the most legitimately exciting finds in the entire Washington Quarter series. Strike quality is an additional dimension that specialist collectors examine closely when evaluating this coin. Because San Francisco's 1932 production included examples struck from dies at various stages of their working lives, and the differences between a coin struck from a fresh, perfectly aligned die and one produced by dies approaching the end of their useful service are visible and meaningful to anyone who has developed the vocabulary to read them. The finest examples from this issue show Washington's portrait with a sharpness and three-dimensional presence that circulated examples completely obscure. The individual lines of the wig rendered with genuine definition, the cheekbone modeling giving the portrait its proper sculptural weight, the lettering crisp and fully formed, without the softness that die wear introduces into later strikes from the same production run. Die variety specialists have documented repunched date varieties and other mechanical anomalies from the 1932S production that represent a completely separate dimension of collector interest beyond the straightforward condition collecting that drives most of the market for this date. Collectors who approach the examination of 1932S quarters with appropriate magnification and the kind of systematic attention that variety collecting demands have found examples in old accumulations and inherited collections where specific design elements show the characteristics of genuine mechanical anomalies rather than surface damage or post-mint alteration, and these findings have been documented in major variety reference catalogs consulted by specialists and advanced hobbyists alike. Responsible examination of a 1932S Washington quarter begins with the weight. A genuine example should measure 6.25 grams on a digital scale accurate to 1/10 of a gram, consistent with the 90% silver composition that defined Washington quarter production from the series' inception through 1964. This weight is fixed and reliable as a preliminary screening tool, though it represents only the beginning of a meaningful examination rather than any kind of definitive authentication. The edge should show clean, evenly spaced reading around the entire circumference with no copper stripe and no irregularity in the groove depth or spacing that might indicate post-mint modification. Then, examine the surfaces in good light, tilting the coin slowly to evaluate whether the cartwheel luster is present and unbroken or whether the high points show the gray, flat appearance that friction leaves on circulated examples. Even modest circulation on the cheekbone of Washington's portrait represents a meaningful difference in collector terms, moving the coin from the mint state grades, where its most significant value is concentrated, into the circulated grades, where the market, while still serious, operates at a different level entirely. The collector market for the 1932S Washington quarter encompasses a value range that parallels and in some dimensions rivals that of the 1932D, with specialists debating for decades which of the two key dates is genuinely scarcer in the grades that matter most to advanced collectors. Honest circulated examples in grades from fine through extremely fine have appeared in dealer inventories and at auction at prices ranging from $200 to $600 and above, depending on specific grade determination and the visual appeal of the individual example, though these figures represent historical observations from completed transactions rather than guarantees of what any specific coin might bring today. Uncirculated examples certified by major grading services at the MS63 level have appeared in documented auction results at prices in the range of $2,000 to $4,000, while gem-quality examples certified at MS65 have commanded $10,000 to $25,000 or more in documented auction events involving motivated specialist buyers. These figures represent the exceptional end of a value spectrum and should be understood accordingly, with professional authentication through a reputable third-party grading service remaining the absolute prerequisite for any coin to command a premium in the serious collector marketplace. The 1932S Washington quarter teaches something that every collector who studies it seriously eventually absorbs: that the most important coins in any series are not always the ones with the most spectacular stories attached to them. There is no dramatic error here, no famous mistake, no industrial accident that created a handful of accidental rarities in an otherwise common production. There is simply a number, 408,000. And that number, compounded by 90 years of circulation and loss and the indifference of people who had no reason to think twice about a quarter, has produced one of the genuinely significant rarities in American coinage. The collector who finds a 1932S in an inherited collection, in a box of old coins purchased at an estate sale, in a bankroll that somehow escaped the attention of everyone who handled it before, is holding the other half of the key date pair that defines the most popular coin series in American numismatic history. What follows is a coin from a different era of the series and a different kind of rarity. Not a production scarcity, but a specific mechanical anomaly that occurred during the very first years of Washington quarter production and that collectors have been documenting and debating ever since. a variety so early and so well established in the specialist literature that its existence is not in question, only its location in the next collection you examine. Number 3. The 1934 double-die Obverse Washington Quarter. By 1934, the Washington Quarter had survived its first 2 years of production and established itself as a permanent fixture in American coinage. The Depression had not lifted. Unemployment remained crushing and the banking system was still finding its footing after the reforms of the previous year. But the quarter itself was flowing through commerce in numbers that dwarfed the key date production of 1932, with Philadelphia striking more than 31 million examples that year and the collector community beginning to take the first systematic interest in the varieties and anomalies that high-volume production inevitably generates. Philadelphia in 1934 was the oldest operating mint facility in the United States, having struck coins continuously since 1792, and by this point in its history it carried the institutional weight of a facility that had produced currency through the Revolutionary War's aftermath, through the Civil War, through the industrial expansion of the late 19th century, and through the monetary upheavals of the early 20th. The coins it produced bore no mint mark in 1934, following the long-standing convention that Philadelphia's output required no identifying letter because it was understood as the default facility of American coinage, the place where coins came from when no other address was specified. And in the absence of that mint mark, the 1934 Philadelphia Quarter is sometimes underestimated by casual collectors who assume that high mintage translates automatically into low significance. It does not. Not when the specific coin under examination is the 1934 double-die Obverse. The double-die Obverse variety of the 1934 Washington Quarter is one of the earliest and most firmly documented varieties in the entire series, catalogued by specialist researchers and listed in the major reference works that serious Washington Quarter collectors consult. It was created by the hubbing process that transferred the design from the master hub to the working dies used to strike the coins. In a properly executed hubbing, the working die receives a single, perfectly aligned impression of the master design. But under certain conditions, misalignment between the hub and the die, insufficient lubrication, mechanical inconsistency in the hubbing press, the die could receive a second impression that was rotated or shifted relative to the first, creating a working die that carried two versions of the design in slightly different positions. Every coin struck by that die then carried the evidence of that double impression in the form of a secondary, shadow-like image alongside the primary design elements. On the 1934 double-die Obverse, the doubling is most clearly visible on the word Liberty arching across the top of the obverse and on the date numerals sitting at the bottom of the coin. Under a loupe or strong magnifying glass offering 5-power magnification or more, the letters of Liberty show a clear, separated secondary impression alongside the primary lettering, a shadow that is distinct and measurable rather than the vague blurriness that surface damage or machine doubling can sometimes produce. The date, 1934, shows similar doubling in the numerals, with the separation between the primary and secondary impression giving each digit a slightly doubled appearance that experienced variety collectors recognize immediately, and that distinguishes this coin from the vast majority of 1934 quarters that carry no such anomaly. But the story does not end with the identification of the variety, because the double-die Obverse exists within a population of 31 million quarters produced that year, and its relative scarcity within that enormous mintage is impossible to establish with precision. What the specialist literature confirms is that it is a documented variety that has been found in circulation, in old collections, and in the kinds of bank-wrapped rolls and estate accumulations that surface periodically when families sort through the savings of previous generations. The collector who approaches a stack of 1934 quarters with a loupe and a working knowledge of what genuine mechanical doubling looks like rather than surface noise is giving themselves a realistic opportunity to identify something that carries genuine collector significance. The physical examination of any 1934 quarter as a potential double-die Obverse candidate begins with the weight. A genuine 1934 Philadelphia quarter should measure 6.25 grams on a precise digital scale, consistent with the 90% silver composition of the pre-1965 series. The edge should carry clean, evenly spaced reading all the way around the coin, with no irregularity and no copper stripe of any kind. Then bring the coin into good lighting and examine the overall surface quality. The cartwheel luster on an uncirculated example, or the characteristic grey flatness of the high points on a circulated one. Before reaching for magnification, at 5 power or better, begin with the word Liberty across the top of the obverse. If you are looking at a standard 1934 quarter, the lettering will appear clean and singular, each letter formed once and completely. If you are looking at the double-die obverse variety, the letters will show a clear secondary impression, separated from the primary by a distance that is visible and distinct rather than merely suggestive. Move then to the date numerals, where the same doubling should be present if this is a genuine mechanical double die rather than a coin with surface disturbance that mimics the appearance of doubling without carrying any of its collector significance. The collector market for the 1934 Philadelphia-Washington quarter in standard circulated condition is honest and straightforward. Most examples carry little or no premium above their silver metal value, which for a 90% silver coin of this weight represents a modest premium above face value, but not the kind of meaningful collector interest that distinguishes significant coins from bullion. But the 1934 double-die obverse occupies a completely different position in the market. Certified examples of this variety, graded by professional services such as PCGS or NGC, have appeared in auction results and dealer inventories at prices ranging from several $100s for clearly circulated examples to $2,000, $5,000, and above for well-preserved uncirculated specimens where the doubling is sharp and the surfaces show strong originality. These figures represent historical observations from completed transactions and should be understood as estimates contingent on professional authentication, current market conditions, and the presence of buyers specifically seeking this variety, conditions that cannot be guaranteed for any specific coin at any specific moment. The 1934 double-die obverse Washington quarter is, in the most fundamental sense, a coin hiding in plain sight. It looks like every other 1934 quarter at a casual glance. The same size, the same design, the same weight in your hand, the same silver gleam under light. The difference is invisible to the unaided eye in average lighting and becomes apparent only when a collector slows down enough to bring magnification to the lettering and apply the particular kind of focused attention that variety collecting demands. That gap between casual invisibility and careful visibility is where the collector opportunity lives. And what comes next in this examination is a coin where the hidden anomaly is not on the face of the coin, but in the tiny geographic signature on the obverse, a mint mark that carries within it a story of wartime pressure and industrial accident that specialists have documented and catalogued and debated with the particular intensity that only genuine rarity inspires. Number 4. The 1942 D over horizontal D Washington quarter. By 1942, the United States had been in the Second World War for less than a year, but the transformation of the American economy and the American government into a full wartime footing had already reshaped every institution in the country, including the mint facilities responsible for producing the coinage that kept commerce functioning while the nation mobilized. Denver was striking coins in 1942 under the particular pressures of wartime production demand, an economy suddenly working at full capacity, wages flowing into workers' pockets for the first time in a decade, and the ordinary mechanisms of daily commerce churning through currency at a rate that required the mint's presses to run hard and run continuously to keep pace. The small d mint mark on the obverse of the 1942 D Washington quarter, positioned just behind Washington's neck ribbon, slightly above the date, was punched into the working dies by a process that required a skilled mint worker to align a punch carrying the letter D against the surface of each die and strike it with sufficient force to leave a clear, well-centered impression. Under normal production conditions, this process produced a clean, single mint mark positioned consistently from one die to the next. But under the particular pressures of wartime production, the pace, the volume, the cycling through new dies as older ones wore out faster than peacetime schedules would have required, errors in the mint mark punching process occurred with a frequency that specialists have documented across multiple dates and mint facilities from this era. The 1942D over horizontal D is one of the most clearly documented repunched mintmark varieties in the Washington Quarter series. On this coin, the working die received an initial mintmark punch that was rotated approximately 90 degrees, placing the D on its side, what numismatists describe as a horizontal D, before the die received a second, properly oriented punch that placed the D in its correct upright position. The result was a die that carried both impressions in the metal, and every quarter struck from that die carried the evidence of that double punching in a form that is visible under magnification at the location of the mintmark itself. What makes this variety particularly compelling is the accessibility of the examination. You do not need to search across the entire face of the coin or examine fine lettering at the edges of the design field. The anomaly is concentrated at a single, known location, the mintmark area just behind Washington's neck ribbon. Under a loop of 5 power or greater, a genuine 1942D over horizontal D will show the remnant of the first horizontal D impression alongside and beneath the upright secondary D, a ghostly horizontal element that protrudes from or underlies the properly positioned letter in a way that is distinct and documentable rather than ambiguous. But the story does not end with the identification of the variety, because the 1942D itself was produced in substantial numbers. More than 17 million coins struck that year at Denver, and the repunched mintmark variety represents a fraction of that production figure, a specific subset of dies rather than a characteristic of the entire run. The collector who works through a group of 1942D quarters looking for the variety is engaging in exactly the kind of systematic, patient examination that variety collecting rewards, because the variety is genuinely there to be found but requires the attention that most people who encounter these coins in change jars and old collections never think to apply. Examining a candidate 1942D quarter for the over-horizontal D variety begins with the baseline physical checks that apply to any Silver-era Washington quarter. The weight should measure 6.25 grams on a digital scale accurate to 1/10 of a gram, consistent with the 90% silver composition of the pre-1965 series. The edge should show clean, evenly spaced reading without irregularity and without any copper stripe, because the 1942D is a fully silver coin with no clad layers of any kind. Evaluate the overall surface condition. Luster on an uncirculated example or the characteristic flattening of the high points on a circulated one. Before turning your attention to the specific examination point that defines this variety, bring your loop to the mintmark area on the obverse, the small d positioned behind the neck ribbon just above the date. A standard 1942D will show a single, clean D in that position. A genuine 1942D over horizontal D will show the remnant of an earlier, horizontally oriented D impression alongside the upright final punching, a secondary element that professional variety catalogs have documented with reference photographs that allow direct comparison to the coin in your hand. The collector market for the standard 1942D Washington quarter in circulated condition reflects the reality of a coin made in the millions. Most examples carry a modest premium above their silver bullion value, but no significant collector premium beyond that. The over-horizontal D variety occupies a different tier entirely. Certified examples of this variety, authenticated by professional grading services, have appeared in auction results and dealer inventories at prices ranging from $100 for clearly circulated examples through $500, $1,000, and $2,000 or more for well-preserved specimens in the higher circulated and lower uncirculated grades, with the finest certified examples carrying premiums that reflect both the variety's documented status and the depth of specialist interest in repunched mintmark collecting as a discipline. These figures represent historical observations from documented transactions and should be understood as estimates contingent on professional authentication and current market conditions that shift without obligation to previous price levels. The 1942D over horizontal D Washington quarter is a coin that rewards exactly the kind of attention most people never think to give a wartime quarter. It passed through mint quality control, entered circulation, passed through the hands of workers and merchants and soldiers and their families, and survived into the present in numbers that nobody can enumerate precisely because it was never separated from the rest of the 1942D production for tracking purposes. It is waiting in old collections and inherited coin jars and bank-wrapped rolls purchased from estates, waiting for the collector who knows what to look for and takes the time to look. What comes next is a variety from a different era of the series, a coin struck 8 years after the one we have just examined, carrying a mint mark anomaly that speaks not to the wartime pressure of 1942, but to a different kind of institutional decision. A mint reorganization that created an era so specific and so well documented that specialist collectors have pursued it for generations, finding examples in the places where overlooked coins reliably live. Number 5. The 1950D/S Overmintmark Washington Quarter. In 1950, the United States was 5 years removed from the end of the Second World War and 6 months away from the beginning of the Korean conflict, occupying that particular moment of American history that felt on the surface like the beginning of something stable and prosperous, but carried beneath it the anxieties of a country that had barely finished one global crisis and could not quite believe the next one was already forming. The mint facilities that had run their presses through the war years were now operating in a different register. Not the emergency production pace of wartime, but the sustained, professional output of a mint system serving a growing economy with an expanding demand for coinage across a country where the consumer culture of the post-war era was transforming how money moved through daily life. Denver in 1950 was producing Washington quarters in the tens of millions, a volume that reflected the mature operational reality of a facility that had been striking coins continuously since 1906 and had developed over those decades the institutional knowledge and technical expertise that high-volume precision production requires. The mint workers who operated the Denver presses in 1950 were not the same individuals who had worked through the wartime rushes, but they were the inheritors of a mint culture that carried its practices and its standards forward through training and institutional memory in ways that made the facility one of the most consistent and experienced in the American mint system. It was in this context of experienced, high-volume production that one of the most fascinating and firmly documented varieties in the Washington Quarter series came into existence. The 1950D/S Overmintmark occurred because the Denver Mint, in the course of its 1950 production, used a working die that had originally been prepared for use at the San Francisco Mint and that already carried the S mint mark impression from its original preparation before it was repurposed, reassigned, and punched with the D mint mark appropriate for Denver production. The result was a working die that carried both letters, first the S, then the D punched over it, and every quarter struck from that die carried the evidence of that unusual production history in the mint mark area itself. The Overmintmark is visible on a genuine 1950D/S as a secondary S impression beneath or within the D mint mark on the Obverse, positioned behind Washington's neck ribbon above the date in the location where the mint mark sits on all Washington quarters from this era. Under magnification of 5 power or better, the curve of the underlying S is detectable within the shape of the overlying D, a secondary element that does not simply suggest but clearly shows the presence of a different letter beneath the final punch. Specialist variety catalogs have documented this variety with sufficient precision that collectors working from reference photographs can make a confident preliminary identification before submitting the coin for professional authentication, though professional authentication remains the essential final step before any value can be meaningfully assigned or any transaction responsibly considered. But the story does not end with the Overmintmark itself, because the 1950D/S is not a coin made in tiny numbers like the 1932 key dates examined earlier in this video. The 1950D was struck in more than 21 million examples at Denver that year, and the Overmintmark variety represents a specific die or set of dies within that production run rather than a characteristic of the entire mintage. This means that the variety exists within an enormous population of standard 1950D quarters, waiting to be found by collectors who know what to look for and are willing to examine the mint mark area on every 1950D that passes through their hands. Old rolls of Washington quarters purchased from estate sales, inherited collections sorted without specialist attention, coin jars accumulated over decades. These are the places where the 1950D/S has been found before, documented in collector forums and auction house catalogs with enough frequency to confirm that the variety is genuinely available to the patient examiner without being so common that the collector premium attached to it has collapsed. Examination of a 1950D quarter as a potential Overmintmark candidate follows the same fundamental approach that responsible examination of any silver-era Washington quarter requires. The weight should measure 6.25 grams on a digital scale accurate to 1/10 of a gram, reflecting the 90% silver composition that defines all Washington quarters from this period. The edge should show clean reading without irregularity and without any copper stripe, because 1950 production predates the clad transition by 15 years, and these coins are fully silver in composition. Evaluate the surface quality. The rolling cartwheel luster on an uncirculated example, or the high point wear on a circulated one. And assess the overall strike quality at the center of the reverse eagle's breast, where strike weakness reveals itself first on quarters of this era. Then bring your magnification to the specific examination point that defines this variety. The mint mark area on the obverse, behind Washington's neck ribbon just above the date. A standard 1950D will show a single, clean D in that position, well-centered and fully formed. A genuine 1950D/S will show the underlying curve of the S beneath and within the D, a secondary element that trained variety collectors recognize as the signature of the reassigned die and that professional grading services have certified on documented examples in the collector market. The collector market for the 1950D/S Overmintmark Washington quarter occupies a position in the value spectrum that reflects both its documented status as a confirmed variety and the depth of collector interest in the Washington quarter series as a whole. Standard circulated 1950D quarters carry a modest silver bullion premium and little collector interest beyond that, because the supply of common examples is effectively unlimited at any realistic price level. The 1950D/S variety is a different matter entirely. Certified examples authenticated by professional grading services have appeared in auction records and dealer inventories at prices ranging from several $100s for clearly circulated examples through $1,000, $3,000, $5,000, and in especially well-preserved examples $8,000 or more, with all of these figures representing historical observations from documented transactions rather than guarantees of what any specific coin might bring in today's market. Professional authentication through a reputable third-party grading service is the absolute prerequisite for any Overmintmark variety to command a serious premium in the collector marketplace, because the difference between a genuine Overmintmark and a coin with surface damage in the mintmark area requires expert examination that personal observation, however careful and methodical, cannot reliably provide. The 1950D/S Washington quarter offers something that the condition rarity coins examined earlier in this video do not, a specific, localized feature that any collector with a quality loupe and the reference photographs from a major variety catalog can use as a starting point for preliminary identification. You do not need to evaluate the subtleties of luster or the specifics of strike quality first. You go to the mint mark, you apply magnification, and you either see the underlying S or you do not. That clarity of examination is part of what makes Overmintmark varieties so appealing to collectors who are building their skills. There is a definitive thing to look for in a definitive place, and the vocabulary for describing what you find is well established in the specialist literature that the numismatic community has developed over decades of careful documentation. There is something that all 5 coins examined in this video share, despite the differences in their dates, their mint marks, their era types, and their value ranges. They are all Washington quarters, coins that most people in America have held in their hands hundreds or thousands of times without examining them with any particular attention, coins that the ordinary machinery of commerce treats as interchangeable and functionally invisible. And yet each of them carries within its design and its history and its specific physical characteristics a story that becomes more compelling the more carefully you look. The 1932 key dates carry the story of a series born in the worst economic year of the 20th century, produced in numbers so small that their rarity was essentially built in from the day they left the press. The 1934 double-die Obverse carries the story of a mechanical anomaly from the earliest years of the series, a hubbing error that left its shadow on an unknown fraction of that year's production and that has been showing up in old collections ever since. The 1942D over horizontal D carries the story of wartime production pressure, of mint marks punched in haste into dies that needed to be ready faster than careful alignment permitted. And the 1950D/S carries the story of a single die that traveled between mint facilities, carrying its original geographic signature into a production run where it did not belong, creating an artifact of institutional decision-making that collectors have pursued for generations. None of these coins will announce themselves loudly. They will not look different from the others in a handful of change or a jar of accumulated quarters. The difference between a coin worth 25 cents and a coin worth $35,000 can come down to the number stamped beneath a date, the shadow of a second impression on a letter, the curve of a previous mint mark beneath a final punch. And the only way to know which coins in your possession carry those differences is to look. Carefully, methodically, with the right tools and the right knowledge and the realistic understanding that most coins, even carefully examined ones, will turn out to be exactly what they appear to be. But the ones that are not will not tell you so unless you ask. Subscribe so you never miss the next coin in this series, because what comes next involves a date that experienced collectors treat with a reverence that casual observers find puzzling until they understand the story behind it. A story about a coin made in enormous numbers that almost nobody saved, in a condition that almost nobody maintained, and that has become genuinely scarce in the grades that matter in ways that the raw production figures do not begin to predict.